Hello, welcome to Run Testers. My name's Nick, and in this video we'll be comparing the Garmin Forerunner 570 to the Garmin Venu 4. So the Venu 4 and the Forerunner 570 are two Garmin watches that come in at a very similar price, exactly the same price in the US, in fact, though the Forerunner 570 is £10 cheaper here in the UK. They have quite a lot of very similar features as well, and while the Forerunner 570 is obviously in the Forerunner range, it's posited more as an endurance sports watch, while the Venu 4 is more in the smartwatch Garmin range. Actually, there's a lot that's very much exactly the same between these two watches, so there are a few key differences I want to draw out in this video that might help you make a decision if you're picking between them. So like I say, the Venu 4 is £10 more than the Forerunner 570 here in the UK. It is £469 compared to $459 for the Forerunner, and then both are $549 in the US. You've got two sizes of each watch. With the Venu 4, it's 41 and 45 millimeters, and then with the Forerunner 570, they're a bit bigger. It's 42 and 47 millimeters. You get the same size screens on the two watches though. It's 1.2 inches on the smaller one and 1.4 inches on the larger watch. Both have very bright AMOLED displays, the latest displays in Garmin's lineup, so they are equivalent in terms of the brightness you're getting. Then one big difference between them when it comes to the design is that the Venu 4 only has 2 buttons, whereas the Forerunner 570 has Garmin's classic 5-button design, so you are going to use the touchscreen a bit more to navigate around the Venu 4. And then another big design difference is that the Venu 4 has a built-in torch or flashlight on the top of the watch, whereas you don't get that on the 570. Garmin's been introducing that to most of its watches this year. It's actually a bit of a surprise now looking back that the 570 hasn't got it, but you do get it on the Venu 4. Then in terms of the cases you have here, both have got metal and plastic elements, but you get a lot more metal on the Venu 4 all round. It's got a steel case for the most part on the sides of the watch. Then you've got a Gorilla Glass screen, whereas the Forerunner 570 you have got an aluminium bezel around the screen, but then the case is mostly plastic, and then again it has a Gorilla Glass screen. Got same kind of sensors on both watches. Both offer multi-band GPS tracking. They have Garmin's latest Elevate V5 heart rate sensor. However, the Venu 4 does have a little extra in that it can do ECG measurements, something that isn't available on the 570. Then you've got the same sports features in terms of the tracking and analysis available. In the past, the Venu would have less sport features than the equivalent Forerunner, seeing as it was posited more as a smartwatch, but across the board here, the Venu 4 and Forerunner 570 offer the same level of sports tracking and training analysis, and it's very detailed stuff in general, just missing a few bits that you get on more expensive models like the Forerunner 970 or Venu X1. There are a couple of new health tracking features on the Venu 4 in the way of health status and lifestyle logging. These are available in the Garmin Connect app for all users, but at the moment the on-watch widgets I think are only in the Venu lineup. They might well come to the 570 in time though. Neither watches have maps. They both just offer breadcrumb navigation. Garmin is still restricting this to its top-end watches, but there's no difference between these two watches on that front. Then when it comes to battery life, it's very similar between the two models as you'd expect, given that they have the same features, same bright screen, same rough size, but actually I think the smaller 570 offers slightly more battery life than the smaller Venu 4, and then the larger Venu 4 offers slightly more battery life than the larger Forerunner 570. But having tested the larger model of both watches, I wouldn't say there's a really noticeable difference in battery life, but I'll dive into more detail on that and the other differences I've noticed in the run test. So on to run test then, and I really enjoyed testing both the Garmin Forerunner 570 and the Venu 4. Both were very impressive and accurate running watches throughout my testing. Would be very happy to have both on my wrist as my only running watch. I think the main drawback of both watches is that the price is quite high compared to the competition, but that's not really relevant in this comparison because the price is pretty much exactly the same. When it comes to the design of the watches, I think there are plus points to both for sure in terms of the looks. We'll come on to the buttons versus touchscreen debate in a minute, but in terms of looks, the Venu 4 is a bit sleeker. It is a very nice watch to have on your wrist. It's a little bit smaller than the 570 as well. I do think it's a really good looking watch all round and has quite a premium feel thanks to the metal case, but 570 it's a bit more fun, I'd say, like the most Garmin's in general actually. You know, the colourful bands you have around the screen on the 570, I think I like this yellow one. I like the raspberry model in the smaller watch. I think does give it a slightly more fun look than a lot of the watches you have in Garmin's range, including the Venu 4. But yeah, there are plus points to both. That will depend a little bit on personal preference. I kind of go back and forth on it, but I do think they are both good looking watches. Now when it comes to buttons versus touchscreen, like as a runner, I would generally prefer to have buttons, but throughout testing the Venu 4, touchscreens work pretty well for me during workouts. Like I set the touchscreen to be, are usable during runs. You have to turn off the auto lock you have on the watch, and swiping between screens, saving at the end of a run hasn't been a problem for me. Like even when running in the rain or having sweaty fingers, or even recently using pretty lightweight gloves. If you go to more heavyweight gloves, the touchscreen obviously becomes a bit more of a problem, and the buttons on the Forerunner and the 570 definitely give you that little bit more ease of control over the watch when you are during activities and that kind of thing. But The 2-button design on the Venu 4 has been fine for me. The main button I use during workouts is a lap button, and it has that, and so it hasn't been a huge drawback for me. It hasn't got 5 buttons, and I do think it's got a pretty big advantage in design on the Forerunner 570 in terms of having that flashlight, which I never thought was that big a deal when it first got introduced to Garmin watches, but as the years gone by, I've become quite reliant on that flashlight and getting around the house after dark, or getting trains out from underneath sofas when my son deliberately angles them under the sofa and I have to try and scoop them out. And yeah, that flashlight is just quite a handy thing to have on your wrist in general. It's a bit of a surprise actually looking back that it isn't on the 570, given that Garmin has put it on so many watches this year, and it's a big plus point to the Venu 4, and I'd say it's a bigger advantage that missing a couple of buttons is a disadvantage. So yeah, I do think the Venu 4 having that flashlight is probably the key difference for me between these two watches. Another very small advantage that is important to me, but probably not to many people, is that you can set your activity accent colour on the Venu 4 to teal, a colour that is not available on the Forerunner 570. It happens to be my favourite colour, so I do use that for the running modes on the Venu 4. There it comes to accuracy on both of them. The GPS accuracy has been the same. It's been very good on both of these watches. In Garmin's multiband mode, I've not seen any problems with either watch in terms of the GPS tracks I've checked after runs, the overall distances, when I've been on routes I know the length of, or races, that kind of thing. They've both been very good on the GPS front. I like the multiband mode on Garmin watches. I've never found it's really let me down, and that's the case with both these watches. Heart rate tracking, like this Garmin Elevate P5 sensor, generally works very well for me across the entire Garmin range. Even on big watches, I find I get very accurate results. I actually didn't have the greatest results with the Venu 4, but I think that's probably just random variance. I did have a few workouts where it wasn't really going up and down in line with intervals, and it read a bit high at the start of runs, that kind of thing. Now, it's the same sensor as the Forerunner 570, which I did have very good results in. I have been testing the Venu 4 out in colder conditions, so that probably explains it a little bit. With both watches, you are going to have moments of inaccuracy, as with any optical sensor. I tend to pair a chest strap to all my watches if I'm using them long term to get more accurate results. But yeah, randomly, the Venu 4 wasn't quite as good as the Forerunner 570 on heart rate. I can't think of a reason why that would be the case other than just, like I say, random variation. But yeah, that's what happened in my testing. Obviously, you've got the ECG on the Venu 4. That's not a big plus for me. I don't tend to use that, but it's very important for some people. So it's worth noting again, that's a feature you get on the Venu 4. And then on the battery life front, neither of these watches are the best in Garmin's range, but they are both pretty good. I've been testing them out in always-on mode on both watches, usually running every day, and I've had notifications coming in, that kind of thing, and usually I get between 4 and 6 days of use out of them, depending on how much running I'm doing. So once I'm running every day, it's 4 days, maybe squeeze to 5 days. If I'm, in a period after a marathon or something like that, when I was testing the Venu 4 and I have a few more days off, it might stretch more towards 6 days. And if you use the race to weight screen, you'll extend it considerably. But I didn't notice a big difference in the battery life between these two watches. So yeah, I wouldn't use that to really decide which one you get. They're both pretty long lasting for bright AMOLED watches, but not exceptionally long lasting. So on to the verdict, and I would say for me this is a pretty clear win for the Venu 4. Like, it might be posited more as a smart watch within the Garmin lineup, but when it comes to Garmin watches, they pretty much all have the same smart features and the same sports features, and these two watches are very similar across the board. The key difference being that the Venu 4 has a flashlight, which I think is the big reason to get it over the Forerunner 570. The big reason to get the 570 over the Venu 4 would be that you really want those 5 buttons, and if you are someone who's constantly swimming with the watch or working out in really cold conditions and always raining or something like that, you just always need those buttons to actually be reliable, then you get them on the Forerunner 570, you don't get them on the Venu 4. You can still pause and take laps with it, obviously, and I found it fine, but for me, definitely the flashlight is the bigger advantage than the lack of buttons is a disadvantage. So yeah, I would go for the Venu 4. And the other thing that might swing it if you are picking between these would be the design of the two. They've got slightly different designs. They are appealing in their different ways. You've got that sleeker, slightly more metallic case on the Venu 4, a bit more premium, a bit more smartwatch looky, I guess, and then the Forerunner 570 has that sporty design with the fun colours, which some people might prefer, even to having a flashlight on their wrist. But yeah, that is the key difference for me. They've both been very good for me during testing. I think these are both really good running watches. The Venu 4 having a flashlight would tip me that way. That's a comparison of the Venu 4 and the Forerunner 570. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Please do like, subscribe, ring the little bell. We'll see you next time.